Hello, everyone. It's a beautiful day here finally in Maine. I want to thank you for attending our wonderful Lunch and Learn here. I am Judy Oberg, the Maine Association of Realtors president for this year. I want to introduce Suzanne Guild, who's the Chief Executive Officer for MAR. We also have Claire Berger here, who is handling all of our legislative needs and handling this today. Suzanne will be monitoring our questions and answers for when we get to that part of the Zoom. We have with us today Dr. Lawrence Yun, Nadia Evangelou, and Amanda Rector. Dr. Lawrence Yun is the Chief Economist, National Association of Realtors. He supervises and oversees the research group at NAR and is responsible for a wide range of research activity for the association. He regularly provides commentary on real estate market trends throughout the U.S. and has testified before Congress on NAR's behalf. Dr. Yun received his undergraduate degree from Purdue University and earned his PhD from the University of Maryland at College Park. Nadia Evangelou is principal economist and director of real estate at NAR, where she leads national and local market intelligence across both residential and commercial real estate sectors. She identifies emerging trends across local markets and translates complex economic developments into actionable insights for realtors as it relates to housing affordability, demographic and migration shifts, and the evolving supply-demand dynamics shaping U.S. real estate markets. She also conducts analysis on federal, state, and local policy issues and evaluates how legislative and regulatory changes may affect real estate markets and home ownership. Nadia holds a master's degree in applied economics from Johns Hopkins University, along with advanced degrees in international economics and public administration. I will introduce Amanda Rector after we are done hearing from Dr. Yun and Nadia. And we are going to be hearing from Dr. Yun now. Thank you.
With me 1 second.
Hello, everyone. I am Lawrence Yun.
We can hear.
I am recording this on Monday, March 16th. I know I was to be with you on the March 17th, but I'm going to have my colleague Nadia do the second half of this presentation. I'm doing this recording because my flight got rearranged for tomorrow's activity. So I guess the airline is constantly changing their schedule part. So thanks for understanding that. But let me give you a very quick sort of big picture outlook of it. And as an economist, I speak better with slides. So let me put that onto the screen. Now here in Monday in Washington, there is a tornado possibility. So we are getting really crazy weather. I know that we had the excessive cold weather condition that I'm sure that people in Maine encountered this year. But let's see what we are seeing related to the economy. So hold 1 second. So here it is. And first, I think important part is the oil prices, the military conflict that is happening in the Persian Gulf, consequently oil prices increase. This is not a good news on many fronts. Realtor members, we know that we drive more than average Americans, so higher gasoline prices definitely impacts the members of NAR far more than the general population. But I think the bigger picture is that higher oil prices means higher mortgage rates. We saw that in the 1970s, oil embargo, oil prices went up greatly, and it ended up where mortgage rate went up to 18% before everything finished out. Now, of course, I'm not predicting 18% mortgage rate. It will be total disaster. But mortgage rate, which had been 6% right before the Iran situation, now about approaching 6.5. But if somehow the oil prices can reverse, go back down, and we have back to the normal condition, then the mortgage rate would be back towards about 6%, which means that it would be the lowest in 3 years, lowest in 4 years, and that's going to greatly help on the affordability front. But Federal Reserve, before the oil prices, were planning on cutting interest rate, at least with the new Fed chair expected to come in May, Kevin Walsh. I'm sure during the interview process with President Trump that he had probably indicated we need to cut interest rate. And furthermore, there's some economic justification. Consumer price inflation could have calmed down, assuming that the oil prices were non-issue. So there was some reason for cutting interest rate, economy softening, trying to help revert some of the economic distress. So Federal Reserve were planning on cutting interest rate, and consequently the mortgage rate, which you care about, which is on the red line, is not a one-to-one relationship with the Federal Reserve, but blue line going down would have brought the red line to go down somewhat later this year, lowest mortgage rate in 3 and 4 year conditions. So that will be a very positive development. But let's just hope that the oil prices do not change all this perspective regarding this. The job market situation, if you want to look at potential home buying demand, I always like to look at the job market. So national picture shows that we have essentially a record high, close to record high employment. In fact, 6 million more people working today compared to pre-COVID. Only problem is home sales are not even back to pre-COVID. Home sales are underperforming, but the way you can view the labor market is potential housing demand. So the potential housing demand has been building, and once the affordability condition driven by lower mortgage rate, we will begin to see some of this potential housing demand reach the marketplace. So at least the potential housing demand has been building. Now, the same data, if I was to put slightly differently, rather than total number of jobs, the job addition each month, we've been circling near zero in recent months. In fact, one can say in the past 12 months, the total job creation has been close to zero. So we are not really adding jobs. Under this circumstance, normally the Federal Reserve will be cutting interest rate. So this is one of the economic reasoning as to why the Federal Reserve will be cutting interest rate. In addition, that consumer price inflation later this year was looking towards much more modest condition with the rents not beginning to rise. So much apartment construction in Boston, so much apartment construction in Portland, Maine, across the country. So the calmer rent condition would have indicated that there was a room for Federal Reserve to make the rate cut. But if we look at the job market, unfortunately, Maine in the past 12 months has fewer number of jobs. But for housing demand, rather than look at 1 year situation, I like to look at longer term perspective. So if we look at pre-COVID to the latest available, in the state of Maine, there's 3.1% more jobs. Again, the normal circumstance, you would have 3.1% more home sales compared to pre-COVID. But we don't have that because of elevated mortgages that we have witnessed in the recent years. So this is the home sales across the country. And in fact, I'm sure you are seeing it in the state of Maine. I think the February data that I looked at for Maine is also showing sort of underperformance compared to what it was 1 year ago, and definitely much underperformance compared to pre-COVID conditions of 2019. But the pent-up demand has been steadily building. Now, one interesting dynamic is that even though the home sales are down, the upper end market has been moving well. And as you know, out in Portland region, Maine, many of the luxury properties, whether the New Yorkers are moving into your state, Bostonians are moving into your state, they were easily willing to grab the upper end market, and consequently home price growth, state of Maine, #1 in the country, 80% price increase from pre-COVID condition. And one potential negative of this huge price gain is that more of your past clients, if they were to sell their home, would face capital gains tax. So this is a little scenario analysis of how many Americans would have to pay capital gains tax because of the price increase. And also, thank you for those who participate at the association governance and the committees, and a few of you who will come to Washington in the month of June, along with 8,000 other realtors, because number one advocacy issue that we'll be pushing for this year is lifting of the capital gains exemption amount from 250,000, half a million, to double that amount so that fewer and fewer Americans would need to pay capital gains tax. And if that's the case, we would have more inventory onto the marketplace. So my final slide, this is before the recent run up in the oil prices, is that I had forecasted 2026 to be a decent recovery year. It's not even getting back to pre-COVID. But if the mortgage rate stays at 6%, and it will do so if the oil prices begin to retreat back down. If that's the case, I anticipate decent recovery based on some of our statistical analysis. And in fact, the person who has been running the statistical analysis is my colleague, Nadia Evangelo, who will be coming on live right after me. But thank you for your grace regarding the travel schedule. And I think you will enjoy Nadia's portion of the presentation. So thank you very much.
So I think I can go over. So thank you, Lawrence, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. So thank you, Lawrence, as well for providing the national outlook. So that context is incredibly helpful and provides a benchmark when we want to see how local markets perform. But as you know, as you all know better than anyone else, people don't buy homes in the national market. So they buy homes in their communities, in their neighborhoods. So in the next few minutes, I want to focus specifically on what's happening here in Maine. Maine has experienced something remarkable over the past several years. So in fact, it has been one of the fastest appreciating housing markets in the country. So the question I want to explore with you today is, why has Maine seen such strong home price growth, and what should you expect going forward? So let me start sharing my screen. So there are many factors that influence housing markets, both nationally and locally. So at NAR, we identify, every year we do that, but we identified the following 10 key factors that you can see here in the slide that we expect to shape housing markets in 2026. So these include things like millennial presence, income and job growth, migration patterns, sensitivity in mortgage rates, how rents compare with the mortgage rates, and also new construction. And of course, all of these matter. But if we step back and ask which factors will have the biggest impact on housing markets in 2026 to stand out. So first of all is the availability of affordable housing supply, and second, improving affordability. So as mortgage rates gradually have moved lower, they have been close to 6%. Now they're a little bit higher, but we expect for 2026 to be close to 6%, to average 6%. So these two forces will mostly determine how much activity we'll see in housing markets this year. And they're particularly important here in Maine. So with that in mind, let's take a closer look at what's happening. So because when we compare Maine to the rest of the country, something really stands out. So since 2019, so pre-pandemic, home prices in Maine have increased by about 83%. So that's the fastest increase of any state in the country. Now, strong price growth can reflect strong demand, but it also raises an important question. Why has Maine experienced such rapid price appreciation? And to understand that, I think we need to look at the supply side of the market. The main reason behind like this rapid home price like growth is the limited housing supply. So at NAR, what we do is that we measure specifically how well the number of listings in a market matches the incomes of local households. So in a balanced housing market, we would expect the available homes for sale to fully match local incomes across all price ranges. So in other words, about like 100% of the supply should align with what local households can afford. But in Maine today, we estimate that only about 69%, so less than 70% of the housing supply matches local incomes. So while there has been some improvement like recently, especially like in the last year, and we see that across like most of the metro areas out there, that the market is still far from balanced. So, and when supply does not match local incomes, prices tend to rise faster, especially like in the lower, in the availability of like lower and middle price range of homes available for sale. And to understand a little bit this supply imbalance better, it helps to break down the market by price point and income level. So when we look at listings, for example, across different price ranges, we see that supply is not evenly distributed. And some segments of the market have more inventory, while others, especially homes that are affordable for middle income buyers, remain much more like limited and still can create competition for these limited properties. And this can also explain why home prices may have increased like specifically for this price like level. So this mismatch between housing supply and local incomes continues to be one of the biggest constraints like in Maine's housing market. And importantly, this is not just it's not just a Maine like story. This is something that we are seeing across the country like as well. So I think this is what we need to have in mind as well. So then let's bring down here, I have included like on the slide, the lower to middle incomes. So for example, we always compare with the national level about like for incomes like $75,000, like households earning $75,000. And what you see here, these households can afford to buy homes that they have a maximum price of $260,000. So what we see that in Maine, they can afford to buy about 23.7%, like 24% of them of the supply out there. While like at the national level, they can afford to buy about 25%. And specifically in this slide here, you're also able to see how many listings, then the number of the listings that we are missing that this income group needs in order to be in a more balanced market. And what we see is that we are missing about 1,200 listings with the price up to $260,000. Then as you can see here in the next slide, where we have the upper incomes, like $125,000 incomes and higher than that, what we see is that we're missing like less listings, and this can also explain why the distribution of the listings out there, the affordable listings, is not evenly like among price income levels. So now let's bring in like in the second major like factors shaping the market, and this is mortgage rates. So as mortgage rates gradually like move lower, affordability improve, as we have seen that on the national level, and we see it like across the markets as well. And when affordability improves, something very predictable like happens. When we have better affordability, more buyers come back into the market. So we have already seen how sensitive like housing demand is to changes in mortgage rates. Even small improvements in rates can bring like more potential like buyers back into the market who had like previously been priced out and they're like on the sidelines. But this creates an important challenge as well. So because if demand increases faster than supply, competition for homes can intensify again. So supply will remain a key factor, I will say, moving like forward. So something that we need to have in mind for the state of Maine as well. So specifically to understand the potential impact of improving affordability from lower mortgage rates from 7% that they were like almost like last year to 6% that are like we expect to average like this year. What we see is that we estimated how many households in Maine could once again afford to purchase the median price homes with these mortgage rates like reduction. So based on those estimates that you can see here in the slide, we find that thousands of additional households could re-enter the market. We see specifically that we have about 190,000 households can afford to buy the median price home in Maine with a 7% mortgage rate, and this increases to about like 214,000 like households that can afford to buy with a 6% mortgage. So this brings about with a 1 percentage point like drop in mortgage rates, this can bring about 28,000 like additional households that can qualify again. Of course, not everybody, not all of them will buy a home, but we estimate about 10% usually they do. So these can also translate into about 2,800 additional home sales in Maine over the next 12 to 18 months that can happen with due to these the lower mortgage rates that we have. So the key takeaway here is that demand is still there, and we see that on the national level as well. But the main constraint remains the availability of homes for sale, and specifically the affordable homes for sale. So, and to help you to track trends at the local level, we actually created the Metro Market Statistics Dashboard. So this tool, I wanted to include it here, allows you to explore housing data across the country, including markets like here in Maine. So for example, like Portland. So with the dashboard, you can select like your specific market, explore key housing like indicators, and download like reports with detailed like local analysis. And most of what I spoke about like today, you're able to find over there. And we plan to have even more analysis about like capital gains exclusion, for example, that Lawrence mentioned, and we're going to provide that at Metro Market level as well. So to summarize, Maine's housing market has experienced one of the fastest price increases like in the country over the past several years. The main reason seems like behind that has been limited housing supply, and this is the characteristic of these northeast areas. And then looking ahead, mortgage rates and housing supply will be the two most important like factors shaping the market. Lower rates will bring more buyers back into the market, but the key to improving housing activity will be increasing housing supply that matches what local households can afford. And if that happens, Maine could see thousands of additional home sales over the next year or so. So thank you again for having me today, and I'm very happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentations.
Judy, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Nadia. That was great. Let's hope that we can improve our housing supply soon. And now I'm going to introduce Amanda Rector. She's the state economist for Maine. Amanda conducts ongoing analysis of Maine's economic and demographic conditions to help inform policy decisions. Amanda is a member of the State of Maine's Revenue Forecasting Committee and serves as the governor's liaison to the U.S. Census Bureau. She started working for the state in 2004 and has been state economist since 2011. She earned a BA in economics from Wellesley College and her master's in public policy and management from the Muskie School of Public Service at the University of Southern Maine. Amanda is originally from Midcoast, Maine, and now lives in Union with her family. Thank you, Amanda.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I am going to share my slides here and bring those up. There has been a lot going on lately in the economy, so I am going to try to cover as much ground as I can. And I thought it would be helpful to start out by framing this in the context of some of the key assumptions that came out of the most recent Consensus Economic Forecasting Commission report for Maine. So Maine has a two-stage revenue forecasting process. The first stage is this independent economic forecast that comes out of what we call the CEFC, Consensus Economic Forecasting Commission. And then that feeds into the revenue forecasting report, which in turn, it's how much is available in the state budget. So we wrapped this up. The February 1st CEFC report, and then the March 1st Revenue Forecasting Committee report. It's really helpful, I think, to sort of go through what the assumptions were that went into that economic forecast, because this is what the commission was thinking about when they did that forecast. So first and foremost, Maine is navigating a period of significant uncertainty around economic policy, government spending, geopolitical tensions, and consumer sentiment. So there is still a lot of uncertainty out there. Also, the economy seems to be experiencing some K-shaped dynamics. So essentially, a lot of the ongoing economic growth, and particularly consumer spending, has been by wealthier households, and that has been offsetting some declines by lower income households. So if you look at sort of top level, it looks like things have been growing, but if you sort of go down below that top level, you can see this sort of K-shaped dynamic forming. Also, the federal government has entered into a period of significant fiscal reprioritization. So shifting funding towards, in particular, sort of defense funding away from some other areas of spending. So sort of reorganizing what they are funding in terms of what their policy preferences are. Inflation, of course, remains elevated above target levels. Consumer sentiment has weakened. And in the short term, net migration will be hampered by federal immigration policies and the housing market. Now, I will remind you that all of this was a February 1st forecast, and a lot has changed since then. So we saw an oil price chart during Dr. Yun's presentation. Just to hammer home that point, this is the Brent crude oil prices on the top. You can see that spike up happening as March started, and then gasoline prices down below. Maine's economy is very responsive to energy prices. We drive a lot. We also use a lot of heating oil. Thankfully, we are coming out of the heating oil season. This is Maine heating oil prices. It was at $4.78 for the week ending March 9th. You can see that big jump up that we saw. The prior jump up there in the chart was after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So thankfully, we are coming out of the energy season. If we are spending a lot of money on heating oil and on gasoline, we are not spending a lot of money in other parts of the state's economy. I will say that in terms of the energy, the price impact on from heating oil price increases for the economy, for Maine, we've seen a shift. So we still lead the nation in the share of households that are heating their housing units primarily using fuel oil, kerosene, etc. It's about 50%. That 50% is a lot lower than it was even just a few years ago. So we've seen an increase in some of the other sources of heating fuel. So that has less of an impact on our economy overall from those rising fuel oil prices, but it is still a large factor. So in terms of the overall consumer price index, the forecast here from the state's Consensus Economic Forecasting Commission, they were feeling like prices were going to be a little bit higher in 2026 than they were in 2025, and then staying at sort of that elevated level in 2027 before coming down in the remaining years of their forecast, but still above that sort of 2% target level. It's coming in around 2.3%, which was actually a little bit higher than they had in their previous forecast. So they were definitely still feeling like there was upward pressure on inflation, even before the recent spikes in energy prices. And then tariffs have really been a big factor the past year. I spent a lot of time learning about and talking about tariffs and trying to keep pace with all of the twists and turns and changes that have been happening. In terms of where we stand right now, the International Emergency Economics Powers Act, or IEEPA tariffs, were overturned by the Supreme Court. When that happened, the administration essentially immediately turned around and said, okay, well, we're just going to put in a 10% tariff on most goods. It's very, very broad-based for 150 days under a different law that allows sort of a temporary tariff. The process for getting refunds from those IEEPA tariffs that would go back to the importers who paid those tariffs is still being determined. There is not really a sense yet of when that will happen, how that will happen, how long it will take, but it is one of the points that is sort of moving through the process. Of course, for Maine specifically, Canada is a really, really important trading partner. So we have seen the imports that have been coming in through the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, the USMCA agreement, remaining exempt. And that is the case with these 10% tariffs in addition to those IEEPA tariffs. But that agreement is up for review this year. And so there is some concern that there might be changes to that agreement that would have implications for Maine's economy down the line. And the Budget Lab at Yale has been doing these regular updates of sort of the estimated impacts to households from these different tariff policies. Their most recent estimates here are a loss of about $450 to $570 per household if those Section 122 tariffs, that's that 10% tariff on most goods, if that expires the way it is supposed to. Now, there's been some discussion that there's sort of a workaround. You could make it permanent by essentially just either Congress passes it and says, yes, we want these tariffs to be in place, or you let them expire after 150 days and then immediately re-implement them. So if that is the case, then it's a larger impact. So there are impacts to household budgets from these tariffs, and that of course impacts the funding that households have available for other things. So just to give you that idea of just how important Canada is for Maine's trade, that top section there is the Portland, Maine district. That's all of Maine and then a little bit of New Hampshire. And I've highlighted in red there Canada. So about 71% of total imports to Maine came from Canada, but only about 1.4% of them were actually tariffed. And so it is really, really vital to have that exemption on those tariffs going forward, because that is such a huge part of our overall import picture. In terms of population change, of course, we saw a lot of migration into the state during the pandemic, 2021, 2022, really robust, mostly from domestic sources. It saw really strong population growth as a result. And then over the years, we saw the domestic migration decrease. Interestingly, we saw international migration increase. So in 2024, we had pretty much the same migration from international and domestic sources. It was actually a little bit more international than domestic. Still enough overall to offset that natural decline that we have in our population from more deaths than births, but slowing from that sort of 2021, 2022 peak. And then, of course, there was a major shift in federal policy, which meant that starting in 2025, we saw international migration decline. Now, I'll point out that for 2025, this is a July 1 count, so it really only includes half a year of that policy. So starting in 2026, we'll have a full year of that federal policy. So that international migration number for 2026 is likely to be even smaller. Now, we did see for 2025 an increase again in the domestic migration, so that we actually saw pretty much the same population growth overall in 2024 and 2025. Maine was 7th for total net migration and net domestic migration in 2025, and 25th for net international migration. So Maine remains a popular destination for people to move to. And this is just a reminder of, so prior to this federal policy change, international migration accounted for 84% of US population growth. And then we saw a historic drop in international migration with the changes to federal policy. Population projections looking forward into the future. This is 2022 to 2027. We released these last year, and 2022 was our sort of base jumping off point that we had historical data for. So 2027 is not that far in the future now. You can see overall population growth was projected to continue, largely in sort of the southern coastal portion of the state, and then up along that I-95 corridor, picking up a little bit more in the down east. Somerset County was the only one projected to decline in this period. But then for the next 5-year period out, so 2027 to 2032, still projected to see population growth overall for the state, slower population growth, and then a similar pattern where you see more growth in that southern coastal I-95 corridor, but you've seen a number of other counties tip over into the negative, including a couple of the mid-coast counties. One of the other things that we saw from that migration in during the pandemic was that it was actually a younger population than the existing population in the state. The average age of people moving in was about 31 years. That is a lot lower than Maine's overall median age of about 45 years. And so we actually saw our median age dip a little bit. It came back up again in 2024, but Maine is the only state whose median age in 2024 was no higher than it was in 2020. All of the other states saw increases over that period. So we are still the oldest state, but we're not the oldest by quite as much. We've closed that gap a little bit because of that migration into the state. And of course, we really like to see that migration of younger populations in because we struggle with an older population that is moving out of prime working age years. And so our labor force participation rate has been declining. If you look back like 20 years ago and then stop just before the pandemic hits and you compare Maine's labor force participation rate to that of the US, Maine actually was running either on par with or a little bit above the US through most of that period. We dipped below just before the pandemic hit, starting in about 2018. And then after the pandemic happened, everything sort of went haywire for a minute. The US sort of came back up, leveled out. Maine, however, has continued on this sort of up and down, but downward trajectory more recently. But so we've opened up this big gap. So the labor force participation rate for the US is much higher than it is for Maine now. But really, that is just a continuation of this downward trend that we had been seeing pre-pandemic. It really is a reflection of our demographic situation. We have more people who are in upper age cohorts where the labor force participation rate is lower. And so that's impacting our overall labor force participation rate. At the same time, we have a very low unemployment rate. Our seasonally adjusted unemployment rate in December was 3.2%. That was unchanged through the second half of 2025. If you look at the county rates, those are not seasonally adjusted numbers. And December tends to be one of our higher unemployment rate months. But even then, if you look at sort of the high water mark there, Washington County was at 5.4%. That's still a very low unemployment rate. And some of the lowest rates there are around 2.5%, Cumberland County coming in at 2.5%. So we have very, very low unemployment rates. We have a shrinking labor force. So that means we have a very, very tight labor market. There just are not a lot of people sitting on the sidelines looking to get new jobs. And if you're going to grow your employment, if you're going to add jobs, you need two things. You need job demand. So you need job openings. Businesses want to hire more people, but you also need people to fill those jobs. And we really don't have that available labor supply. So the forecast for employment growth going forward, you can see we don't have the annual numbers for 2025 yet, but you can see that the expectation here Based on data from the Maine Department of Labor, the Consensus Economic Forecasting Commission is forecasting a little bit of a decline in 2025 employment, and then just a flat line. Part of this reflects some softening in the national employment market, but it really is driven by this expectation that we just don't have the demographics that would allow for a lot of employment growth. I'm going to wrap up with a few things to keep in mind, and then I'm happy to take questions. And there may be lots. So there's been a lot going on. So just to go back to what I started out with, economic uncertainty is very, very high right now, especially related to the military conflict in Iran, the Middle East, energy prices, tariffs. I know everybody probably is sick of hearing about tariffs now. I'm kind of tired of talking about them, but they continue to be an element of uncertainty in the economy. We did see migration pick up during the pandemic. It has slowed a little bit. That the stumbling block there really has been housing availability and affordability. It is not that people don't want to come here. It is that it is really hard to find a place to live that is both affordable and simply available. And then employment growth in the state at this point really is largely limited by labor force availability. There are some things that we can do to try to improve on that. We can try to increase labor force participation, keep older adults engaged longer, look at some of the traditionally underemployed populations, veterans, people with disabilities, new Americans, continue to see in-migration of younger populations. And then also this increased productivity piece, which really is sort of how do you use technology in a way that you can supplement or substitute for labor. But employment growth nationally has started to stall out over the past year. And so there is some softening in the demand side of the labor market as well. And I've put our website here. We publish a lot of slide decks. We publish a monthly economic indicators report. We have some different dashboards that you can look at. And if you are looking for some sort of economic or demographic data about the state that you cannot find, please reach out to me and I would be happy to try to help you find it. So let me take down my slide deck. There we go. And I'm happy to take questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. That are some pretty eye-opening statistics you've been giving us. Suzanne, do we have any questions?
I do have a couple. I'll start with Nadia. So a couple of your slides talked about projections, and granted, we don't know what's going to happen with oil prices, but with lower mortgage interest rates. And listening to all of this today, and you've heard the landscape for Maine's housing availability, won't lower mortgage rates increase the demand for that limited supply? And so pricing will continue to have that upward pressure. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that dynamic is going to be more magnified, maybe in a place like Maine?
Indeed, and that's the main, it's the trick here. So when you have more people coming back to the markets, this is expected to create more demand. So now we need more than ever to have more supply, because then the gap between what people can afford to buy and what is available out there is going to be even larger. So we see improvement in most of the areas across the US. Maine and other Northeast states, they lack of inventory. We know that, and that's the main reason that keeps prices to grow faster than other parts of the country. But we see some improvement in the affordable supply. However, with better mortgage rates that we expect to continue, we had 3 weeks ago, they went below the 6%, which was great. Now they're back to 6.3. So, but again, we expected to have higher mortgage rates relatively due to the Middle East, the conflict that there is out there. So, of course, this will create more demand. And this is the reason that we want to have more supply, and specifically we need to have not just counting the number, we need to have specific supply, because if you have supply at prices that people cannot afford to buy, then you don't see any results. So more homes will not translate to more home sales. And this is what we see at the national level, for example, because many times they ask me, okay, we have more inventory, we have better affordability, but home sales remain sluggish, for example, like in 2025, and they're still like sluggish. And the main reason for that I can explain is that just to go beyond like counting the number of the inventory, what we do when we need to do is like to see how many of the homes available for sale are at price points that people can afford to buy. And then you see the gap that can explain why homes stay like longer, because if they cannot afford to buy these higher, like in the higher end, like prices, this can also explain why home prices continue to rise, and the reason that home sales is not like moving the way that we expected.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's exactly right. One of the things when I was looking at Amanda's slides, and you were showing the population movement within our state, how people are migrating in and moving around within our state. I guess I was wondering, I guess those population projections, did you include housing supply as part of that equation for how people are moving? Because if there's no available supply, they're not going to, or affordable, they can't move to those particular areas within our state. Is that
Right,
something you look at?
Yeah, not explicitly. So when we do the population projections, we base them off of recent trends in births, deaths, and migration. So in as much as housing supply is a constraint on migration, we would pick that up, but it would only pick up sort of whatever the recent historical trend is. We're not doing a separate projection of housing supply that we're sort of using as an input to that model for population projection.
That's
But
interesting.
yeah, and if you look at the change from the early days of the pandemic, we saw a lot of migration into the more rural parts of the state. More recently, we've seen that shift back towards migration into some of the larger urban areas. So sort of the areas along that I-95 corridor where we traditionally see more population growth. But it remains sort of a question how much of that migration to other areas was limited by the housing availability. I know, Knox County, where I live, was one of the areas that saw population decline because migration wasn't enough to offset the natural population decline. But it's not that people don't have job opportunities here, don't want to live here. It's just that there are no available affordable houses in the area. And so that really has been one of the constraints.
Yeah, I think for sure.
And if I can add, is that
Sure.
this is what we see consistently, like across the country, that they continue to move, even though affordability is not so good. So in places that they cannot find some homes. So because sometimes they ask me, okay, how can they move like to Florida, for example, for homeowners, insurance costs, like other factors like rising costs, but we still see people that they continue to move in places that they want to move, for example. So of course, this translates to more like a higher, it's more difficult for the local residents because then they have like more competition and of course like home prices to drive like to drive up. But one of the reasons that, and Lawrence mentioned a little bit about capital gains exclusion. So our focus is like mostly to build new homes, and that's the way that we increase like supply. But sometimes we need to have in mind that about like 85% of the home sales are coming from existing homes. So sometimes we need to think how to release it, so how to have like more existing homes available for sale, because this can increase the supply short term. So because it takes like time to build homes, so it takes like a year, a couple of years to have more homes, single family homes on the market. So with the existing homes, this is, I will say, easier, faster, short-term like solution to add to the supply. And specifically for Maine, for example, But we have seen like from the capital gains exclusion, there are about like 15% of the homeowners that they have that they have to pay like these capital gains like taxes, and this can also show how many of them they're like locked, they feel locked, and probably there's one of the reasons that they don't want to sell and they just want to stay like longer just to avoiding like paying these taxes. But there are about like 67,000 like homeowners, so 67,000 like homes. So have that in mind, that how you can increase like the supply like in Maine as well.
Yeah, I had somebody commenting in the chat about the chart showing the income versus the affordable home price was shocking. And, all of us, we want to get the most home for the least dollars. And so there's also all that pressure that even if they can afford at this other level, they're going to potentially move down and create more demand at those lower levels. So yeah, that was quite an eye-opener of a chart that you showed. I think that was Nadia showed us that. What about remote workers? Like, are we seeing that slowing down a bit in Maine, Amanda?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it is very, very challenging to get actual solid numbers on this. What we've been using as sort of a proxy is looking at sort of growth in establishments versus growth in employment, because you have a lot more jobs than you have employers. So if you see a big increase in the number of employers that isn't sort of corresponding with a big increase in employment, it's an indication that you've got, like an out-of-state employer coming to the state and saying, hey, I have one person who is now working in the state. You need to cover them under your unemployment insurance program. I'm reporting to you. And we had seen it sort of, we saw it really pick up at the start of the pandemic. It slowed a little bit, and actually it has continued to grow. So it doesn't seem yet that we have seen like a big exodus of people. So I think the availability of remote work continues to be one of the things that allows people to come here and or stay here without finding a local job as well.
Yeah, so I'll just, we have a statewide MLS, Maine Listings can track buyer zip code data, and we watched that all during the pandemic. And it used to be around 75% of people moving in Maine were from Maine with a zip code, and 25% had non-Maine zip codes, and that has been around 70%. So we've got that 5% impact of people that, we're having more come from other places in the country. Not a lot of international buyers still, but we do have a lot of people, mostly from 5 or 6 states. It makes up the majority of that. But so I'll just leave that with everyone. Maine Listings just put out a chart that shows the United States where everybody's zip code came from. So we can share that in an upcoming e-news for all of you. I don't have any more questions. Does anybody have any last questions here for the chat?
I
If
have a
not,
question.
okay, go.
Nadia, you mentioned that one of our biggest problems was our lack of inventory. Is that the same problem in every state? Are they all seeing that, or are there some states that don't have that problem?
Midwestern states, they don't have, like Ohio, whatever like is more affordable, usually they don't have. They're like the data shows they're in the balanced market, or at least they have enough affordable listings for middle income buyers and lower income buyers. So unfortunately, what we see is that the high cost areas, like for example, Los Angeles is one of the top there with the least affordable like supply for buyers, but in the Northeast the story is the same. So they're like around like below the 70%. So which is like 77% is about like the supply that matches with the local incomes, which is the national level. But usually in the Northeast they're like below the national level.
Thank you. Suzanne, do you have any other people?
This will be the last question. Since Maine is the oldest state, have you considered an increase in estate sales and its impact on housing availability and affordability. We don't look at that data at Maine Listings, whether it's an estate sale or not. I don't know if that's anything that NAR or the Maine government looks
No,
at.
no, we don't. We don't have that ability.
Yeah, we don't either.
Okay, well, I want to thank both Nadia and Amanda for this wonderful time and all of your great, I don't know how great, all of your interesting information and how it is affecting us daily. And so I just wanted to thank everyone who came and participated in this Lunch and Learn. And please stay tuned for announcements around upcoming professional development and opportunities via our social and e-news. Is there anything else you want to add, Suzanne?
No, happy spring. I think that's Friday.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.